If I had known that just one cup of hot water could wash away 70 years of self-respect, perhaps that morning I wouldn't have gone down to the kitchen. I had only meant to boil some water to make ginger tea. My kitchen was small, but the winter sunlight streaming through the window still made it warm. The old wooden table was worn at the edges, and the vase of carnations my daughter-in-law had bought last New Year was still in bloom. I thought this morning would be quiet, but then the door opened. Matthew, my son, appeared, hair disheveled, t-shirt wrinkled, smelling of cigarettes mixed with coffee. He was 40, tall, his shadow filling the doorway. His eyes swept quickly around the kitchen as if searching for something, then stopped on me. "Mom, give me your credit card. I need to pay something urgent." His voice was hoarse and firm, like an order. I hadn't yet answered when he added, "Just 10,000. I'll pay you back this weekend." 10,000. To him, that was just. To me, it was the amount I had saved all year from my small pension and the little money I made selling handmade pottery. I set the teapot down, looked straight into his eyes. "No." Just one word. And right after, the air thickened, as if the whole kitchen had shrunk into an empty space between the two of us. Matthew didn't shout immediately. He stepped forward, took a porcelain cup from the table, poured boiling ginger tea straight from the steaming pot, and splashed it on me. The hot water struck my arm, seeping through the thin sweater, burning so sharply I had to step back, bumping into the fridge. The cup fell to the tile floor, shattering into 3 pieces, the sound ringing like a full stop to something inside me. I clenched my teeth, didn't scream, just pulled my arm back. "You're so selfish, Mom," Matthew said, his face cold as stone. "If you won't help, then get out of this house. I'm not supporting someone who just hoards money for herself." The word "supporting" cut deeper than the burn. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my house. It's your house, but I'm the one paying the utilities, buying groceries. I've been taking care of you since Dad died. I just need a little help and you can't even do that." I clenched my fist, the burn radiating from my wrist up to my shoulder. I wanted to tell him that since his father died, I had still managed on my own, still contributed to every bill, still paid for my own medicine. But I knew that anything I said now would be twisted into making excuses. He crossed his arms, blocking the kitchen doorway. "Decide, Mom. Either give me the card or be out of here before tonight." Not an offer. An ultimatum. I looked down at the shattered cup at my feet. One shard had a blue pattern from the set I had bought at a craft market 20 years ago, once beautiful in the tea times with my husband. Now it was only sharp edges, like my son's voice in this moment. I didn't answer. I opened the cupboard, wrapped my arm in a wet towel, letting him stand there. Then I said, "Before the sun sets, I'll be gone." Matthew froze for a second, maybe thinking I would resist. But he didn't know I had worked 35 years in a library, where I learned that silence can be a weapon and sometimes, leaving is the strongest reply. I went upstairs, sat on the bed where I had spent 3 months after breaking my hip. Back then, Matthew had spoon-fed me porridge, turned on the TV for me, told me I could stay here as long as I wanted. I had believed him. Now I saw clearly it was all a setup. Since I moved in with him, Matthew had helped manage my bank account, helped pay the bills, helped buy necessities. But gradually, every expense had to go through him. He set up online payments, told me not to worry, not to touch anything. And I foolishly agreed. I pulled a suitcase from under the bed. Dust covered it thickly, but the lock was still firm. I opened the wardrobe, folded each shirt, each scarf. The small jewelry pouch held only a few old silver pieces and my tarnished wedding ring. But they were mine. In the drawer, I found a yellow envelope. Inside were my birth certificate, pension booklet, and a printed bank statement from 2 years ago. I didn't remember why I had hidden them so carefully, but now I was grateful I had. The sound of the TV floated up from downstairs. Matthew was probably watching sports. He didn't ask if I was okay, didn't check my burn. I locked the suitcase, then opened the nightstand drawer to look for my wallet. It was gone. I rummaged through my handbag empty. My heart sank. Yesterday I had used that wallet to buy joint ointment at the shop nearby. Matthew had taken my bag to help me pay. I remembered what he used to say, "Let me handle everything, Mom, you just rest." I had believed him. And now, I had nothing. It wasn't just about money. He had taken away my ability to decide piece by piece with a sweet voice and the excuse of caring. I sat heavily on the bed, looking out the window. Sunlight fell on the bare trees. I thought of my husband. If he were alive, he would never have let this happen. I reached for my phone, searched for Robert H. My husband's old friend, now a retired lawyer. I called. His voice was deep and warm. "Karen, it's been a while. Something wrong?" "I need to get out of here," I said. "And I need help." He didn't ask further. Just said, "I'll come." I hung up and waited. Downstairs, Matthew's laughter echoed low, dry, and unfamiliar. Half an hour later, there was a knock at the door. Robert stood there, gray coat, blue scarf, holding a paper bag. He looked at me, his eyes understanding more than any explanation could. "Let's go," he said. I pulled my suitcase, walked down the stairs. Matthew looked up, surprise and anger mixed in his eyes. "Mom, you're really leaving?" "I'm not planning to," I said. "I'm leaving." He opened his mouth, but Robert stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "She needs space. Don't stop her." We stepped out. The cold wind hit my face, but I felt lighter than ever. In the car, Robert asked, "Do you have somewhere you'd like to go?" "I just need a place where my son doesn't have a key." He nodded, drove toward the suburbs. We stopped at a small serviced apartment. The door opened to a bright living room, tidy kitchen, a window overlooking a park. I set my suitcase down, feeling as if I had crossed a border. Robert handed me an envelope. "Inside is a temporary order to protect your finances. We'll speak to the bank tomorrow." I opened it and saw a copy of the house deed, something I thought Matthew had complete control over. Robert explained, "You're still the legal owner. There's been no lawful transfer. This is your chance." I gripped the edge of the paper. All these years, I thought I had lost everything. But it turned out, there was still something to keep. That night, I made a new cup of ginger tea. No one splashed it at me. No one demanded my credit card. It was just me, alone, with gentle warmth. I knew that starting tomorrow, a long battle would begin, not just with Matthew, but with my own fear and habit of giving in. But tonight, I allowed myself to be silent. Not the silence of endurance, but the silence of someone who has decided never again to let anyone take away her rights. And I knew, tomorrow morning, when the sun rose, I would begin reclaiming every piece of my life he had tried to make his. I woke up early the next morning, not because of an alarm, but because of the faint light seeping through the curtains. The serviced apartment Robert had brought me to wasn't big, but it was so quiet I could hear sparrows chirping in the park trees. The ginger tea I prepared the night before was still there. I poured some into a cup, sipping slowly, letting the mild heat chase away the lingering sting on my burned arm. The redness had eased, but the mark of it still smoldered inside me. Robert arrived right on time, carrying a paper bag full of documents. He set it on the table and pulled up a chair across from me. "Today we're doing two things. 1, we'll block all of Matthew's access to any related accounts. 2, we'll check the legal status of the house." I nodded, wondering if I had the courage to face all the paperwork I'd been avoiding for so long. But then I remembered the look in Matthew's eyes when he threw the tea at me, the look of someone who saw his own mother as nothing but an ATM. That pain was stronger than any fear. We went to the bank at 9 a.m. The young teller smiled in greeting, but her smile faltered when Robert said, "We need to verify suspicious transactions and change access rights." I handed over my ID card, passport, and a bundle of old statements I'd kept in a yellow envelope. She looked through them, her brows knitting. There have been several large cash withdrawals in the past 6 months, and some online transfers to an account under the name Matthew Grant. Do you confirm these? I shook my head, a chill running down my spine. No. I never gave permission. Robert interjected, "We request an immediate freeze on online transactions and a complete password change." 10 minutes later, my account was secured with a new authentication layer. The teller handed me a sheet of paper. "Keep this safe. From now on, only you can receive the confirmation code." I held the paper, feeling as if I were holding a new key. Next was the land registry office. Robert explained the situation and requested a record of the property's title. The clerk tapped at his computer, then looked up. "The current owner is still Karen Collins. There's no record of any legal transfer." I could hear my own heartbeat. All this time, Matthew had made me believe the title was changed to his name for the sake of convenient tax payments. But the truth was, he had never done it. Robert tilted his head, giving me a faint smile. "That means you have the right to decide the fate of the house, right now." We left with a copy of the house records and a to-do list. Robert told me to consider renting it out or selling it, to cut Matthew off completely. I stayed silent. Part of me wanted to keep the house. It was where I had lived with my husband, where I'd planted every rosebush. But another part knew that as long as the house remained, Matthew would find a way to cling to it. In the afternoon, I strolled around the park near the apartment. The March chill made the dry leaves crisp underfoot. I stopped at a small coffee shop on the corner. The owner, a salt and pepper-haired woman named Helen, handed me a hot cappuccino and asked if I'd just moved in. I smiled faintly. Just temporarily. Waiting for things to settle. Helen nodded knowingly. She told me she once left home with nothing but a suitcase, after being financially exploited by a relative. Her story was short, without embellishment, but enough to make me feel less alone. That night, I got a message from Matthew. "Mom, I need to talk. It's not what you think." I read it, then placed the phone face down. Robert had warned me, "Don't let him drag you into an emotional conversation. Everything goes through the lawyer." I didn't reply. The next day, Robert introduced me to a financial advisor named Priya. She was about 40, with a gentle Indian lilt to her voice and steady eyes. She reviewed the documents and said, "What you've experienced is called financial abuse in the family. It's hard to recognize because it's often wrapped in care. But now that you see it, we can fix it." We made a plan: transfer all savings into a new account in my name only, update the beneficiaries on my insurance, and set up an emergency cash fund to cover 6 months of comfortable living in case things went wrong. Priya also taught me how to monitor bank transactions weekly, keep receipts, and never share passwords even with family. As I left, she said something that stayed with me. Control over your finances is control over your life. Whoever holds your money decides everything else. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights reflect on the wet pavement. This apartment wasn't home, but it was where I was starting to rebuild my protective walls. Around 7, there was a knock at the door. I hesitated, then checked the peephole. It wasn't Matthew, it was Olivia, my neighbor across the hall. She carried a tray of cookies and smiled. "I saw you just moved in. Welcome." We sat in the living room and talked. Olivia was an art teacher, single, with a fat cat named Jasper. When I mentioned briefly that I'd left a difficult family situation, she didn't pry, only said, "If you ever need someone to talk to or help you out, just knock on my door." After she left, I realized I'd gone 48 hours without hearing shouting, without anyone scrutinizing my spending, without having to justify buying a box of tea or a book. This feeling, was strange but pleasant. That night, I wrote in my small notebook. Day 2, no more invisible locks on my life. No more asking permission to exist. The next morning, Robert called. We have news. My lawyer has officially notified Matthew that any transactions from your account must be reimbursed or he'll be sued. His reaction was pretty intense. I asked, intense how? He called the office 3 times, leaving long messages. Mostly blaming and playing the victim. But the important thing is, he knows the game is ending. I sighed, but there was no panic this time. Instead, something close to relief. At noon, I saw Helen again at the coffee shop. I told her what I'd been doing. She smiled. You'll be surprised at how strong you are when you're no longer controlled through guilt. I went home with a small bag, some new tea, a novel, and a bunch of yellow tulips. I placed the flowers on the table, letting them bloom in the room like a reminder that I could still choose beauty for myself. That evening, I got a video call from an unknown number. It was Sarah Matthews' younger sister, who lived in another state. She hadn't heard about what happened, but hearing my voice, she immediately asked, Karen, what's going on between you and Matthew? He called me saying you left without explaining. I told her briefly, without hiding the truth. Sarah was silent for a while, then said, I believe you. And if you need, I'll testify about the times I saw Matthew borrow money from you and never pay it back. I hadn't expected that. Maybe I wasn't entirely alone in this family. When we hung up, I felt a spark of hope that the truth would find listeners, even if late. Before bed, I got a message from Robert. Tomorrow, we'll discuss renting out the house. I have a potential buyer if you want to sell it outright. I turned off the lights and lay in the dark. In my mind, I saw the old house, the walls I had once scrubbed clean, the garden I had tended. And then, Matthew standing in the kitchen doorway, teacup in hand, eyes cold. I knew that to truly be safe, I might have to let go of the house as well. And I knew that tomorrow, when I signed whatever papers were put before me, I wouldn't just be selling a property, I'd be selling the last rope Matthew used to bind me. The next morning, I woke with a strange feeling, not fear, not exactly peace, something in between, like standing on the edge of a cliff knowing I was about to step onto a path from which there was no turning back. Robert arrived earlier than planned. He carried a thick folder, set it down on the small kitchen table of the apartment, and pulled out a chair. Today is decision day, Karen. If you're ready, we'll start the process to sell the house. I stayed silent for a moment, my fingers unconsciously brushing the pale red scar on my left arm, the place where that ginger tea had splashed. It was still there, a reminder. I'm ready, I said. We drove to the real estate agency that Robert trusted. A woman in her 50s named Laura greeted us. She wore a white blouse, her hair neatly tied back, sharp eyes, and a professional smile. I've reviewed the documents for your house, Laura began. Good location, high market value. But, she flipped a page in her folder, if someone is living there and refuses to leave, the selling process becomes more complicated. Robert cut in, we know. But legally, Karen is still the sole owner. The person living there has no rental agreement and doesn't pay rent. Which means he has no right to block the sale. Laura nodded, then asked bluntly, is this person likely to cause trouble? I took a deep breath. Yes. It's my son. A brief silence settled over the room. Laura looked at me a moment longer, not with pity, but with the gaze of someone who's heard many unbelievable stories before. She simply nodded, then we'll make this as quick and discreet as possible. The first step was to reassess the house's value. Laura sent a team of appraisers that very afternoon. They would arrive when Matthew wasn't home. According to what I knew from Sarah, he had plans to meet a friend in the next town today. Robert advised me not to be there. Let the professionals handle it. You don't need to see him until everything is done. I agreed, though I couldn't shake the unease inside me. It was still the home I had once loved and cared for. Now it had become a silent battlefield. That afternoon, while I was sitting in Helen's cafe, I got a message from Laura. Assessment complete. The house is in better condition than expected. Sale price can be higher than we thought. I read the message with a mix of relief and bitterness. Every brick, every door had once been a part of me, and now they would belong to someone else. That evening, Olivia brought over a jar of homemade strawberry jam. We sat eating toast with jam, chatting about nothing in particular. When I told her I was going to sell the house, Olivia didn't ask why. She just said, "Sometimes you have to let go of one thing to save the rest of yourself." The next day, Robert took me to sign the brokerage contract. Laura explained each clause carefully, then handed me the pen. When the ink touched the paper, I felt a break not in my heart, but in the invisible cord tying me to Matthew. As we left the office, Robert said, "Now things will move quickly. But Karen, you have to be ready for Matthew to find out and react." I just nodded. I had been ready for this storm since the day I walked out of that kitchen. Late that afternoon, I got a call from Matthew's number. I let it ring, then declined it. Moments later, a message came. "Mom, I heard you're selling the house. What is this? Are you throwing me out on the street?" I didn't answer. I saved the message and forwarded it to Robert. That night, Sarah called me. "Matthew just contacted me, yelling and saying you betrayed him. But I told him straight that you have the right to do whatever you want with your property." I felt my throat tighten. "Thank you." Sarah gave a soft laugh over the phone. "You're not alone, Mom." In the days that followed, Laura brought potential buyers to view the house. Matthew avoided being there most of the time, but I heard he started spreading rumors in the neighborhood that I had been tricked out of my house. Robert told me not to care. Potential buyers only needed to know the legal truth. A week later, someone put down a deposit. Everything moved faster than I had imagined. When I got the news, I was at Helen's cafe. She poured me another cup and said, "Congratulations. You've just bought back your freedom." I smiled, but I knew the hardest part was still ahead, handing over the house. 3 days before signing the final sale contract, Matthew suddenly showed up at my apartment. I was watering the orchids when I heard a hard knock at the door. Looking through the peephole, I saw his face gaunt, but his eyes still burning with anger. I didn't open the door. He knocked again, then shouted, "Mom, open the door. We need to talk." I kept my tone calm. "We'll talk through the lawyers." There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. "You're destroying this family yourself." I didn't respond. A moment later, I heard footsteps walking away. Olivia, having heard the noise from the hallway, came to knock on my door. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "And I'm not afraid of him anymore." On the handover day, Robert and I sat in the conference room at the law office. Matthew wasn't there according to his lawyer. He had received notice but refused to attend. When I signed the final document, I felt as if I had cut the last thread binding me to the years of control. Afterward, the money from the sale went straight into a new account only I could access. Priya called me as soon as the bank confirmed, "Karen, now you can start over completely." That evening, I sat alone by the window, looking at the stretch of streetlights. In my mind, there was no longer Matthew's shouting, no image of a cup of tea shattering on the tile. Only the sound of the wind and a wide open space ahead. I knew my life had just turned to a new chapter, one that I would write myself, no one else. After signing the sale contract, I thought I would feel completely relieved. But in the first few days afterward, I realized this new peace was more fragile than I had imagined. Not because I regretted it, I didn't, but because I knew Matthew wouldn't give up easily. Robert said, "People who lose control often try to create a new crisis. You have to be prepared." I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, while I was at Helen's cafe, Olivia called. "Karen, there's a man knocking on your apartment door, making a lot of noise. I think it's your son." A chill went down my spine. Not fear but the shiver of recognizing a scene before it unfolded. "I'll be right there," I said, but Robert sitting beside me at the time put a hand on my shoulder. "No. Let me go first." When we arrived, Matthew was standing in the hallway, speaking loudly to Olivia and a building security guard. "This is my mother. I have the right to go in," he yelled, his face flushed red. I stepped out from behind Robert, keeping my voice steady. "No, Matthew. That right ended the day I left the house." He turned toward me, surprise flashing in his eyes before they hardened. "You think you've won? You're being fooled by these people." He pointed at Robert. "He's using you to take your money." Robert didn't speak, just stood beside me like a solid wall. I said, "What I'm doing isn't about winning or losing. It's about living without you controlling me." Matthew looked at me as if he didn't recognize me anymore. Then he walked away, his shoes striking hard against the hallway floor, leaving behind a heavy smell of cigarette smoke. Olivia shook her head slightly. "I've never seen anyone look at their mother like that." That night, I got an email from an unfamiliar address, but the contents were all too familiar: accusations mixed with pleading, mixed with threats. "You're destroying the family. You'll regret this. If you don't give me at least part of the money from selling the house, I'll..." The last sentence trailed off. I forwarded the email to Robert and Priya. Priya called me right away. "Karen, this is valuable evidence. Please keep everything. We'll submit it to the police if necessary." I understood. And for the first time, instead of feeling discouraged or afraid, I felt like I was laying one brick at a time to build a case to protect myself, a fortress made of truth. The following weeks, I was busy settling into the new apartment. I bought a small bookshelf, arranging the books I'd brought from the old house. Every time I placed one on the shelf, it felt like I was stitching back together pieces of my life. Helen kept up her habit of offering me a cup of coffee every morning. Olivia would sometimes drop by with Jasper the fat cat to help you relax. I realized I was forming a new safety circle, small but genuine. But Matthew still tried to slip in. One afternoon, I got a notification from the bank. There had been an unusual login attempt to my account from an unknown device. I immediately called Priya. "Lock down all passwords," she instructed. "And I'll contact the bank's cybersecurity department." Priya later reported that the IP address from the login attempt matched the area where Matthew lived. There was no doubt anymore. Robert said, "We need to file for a restraining order." I knew he was right. I used to think that was an extreme measure, something for strangers, not for your own child. But now, I understood that danger doesn't depend on blood ties. On the day of the court hearing for the restraining order, I wore a dark blue coat, my hair neatly pinned. I didn't look around to see if Matthew was there. I didn't need to know. I just looked at the judge, answering each question with a steady voice. "How do you feel threatened?" the judge asked. "I feel that if I don't have legal protection, my son will continue to find ways to regain control over my finances and my life," I said, my voice unwavering. The order was granted for 6 months, with the option to extend. That night, I came home and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the restraining order in my hands. I wasn't happy to have it. I was relieved knowing I just built another door between myself and the past. A week later, Sarah came to visit. We sat in the park eating sandwiches Olivia had made. Sarah said Matthew had called her, crying, saying I was being brainwashed by outsiders. I asked, "Do you believe me?" Sarah took my hand. "You've endured enough. Now it's time you live for yourself." Those words rang inside me like a melody. The next month, I joined a book club at the local library. Every week, I met new people, talked about novels, laughed at jokes. No one there knew I had once been manipulated by my son. I was just Karen, a woman who loved books, loved ginger tea, and was learning to trust herself again. One evening, coming home from the club, I found a small envelope at my door. No sender's name. I picked it up, opened it. Inside was an old family photo, me, Matthew as a child, and my husband. The photo had been folded in half, and across the crease was a handwritten line, "We used to be a family. Remember that?" I sat in the chair, staring at the picture for a long time. Then I took scissors and cut the photo in two, one half with me and my husband, the other with Matthew. I kept my half and threw the other away. Not because I had forgotten the good days, but because I didn't want them used as a rope around my neck. When I told Helen, she simply said, "Sometimes cutting away is also a way of keeping." Spring came, and I started planting a few small pots of flowers on the balcony. Every morning, I watered them, watching the buds emerge. I felt my life was the same, not loud, but sprouting again. And I knew Matthew might still be trying to break through. But now, I was no longer the mother cowering in the kitchen, trembling at her son's anger. I was the woman who had locked every door he used to walk through. I had learned the most important thing: freedom isn't something someone gives you. It's something you take back and guard. I thought that after the restraining order, Matthew would back off. But experience had taught me one thing: people who lose control don't disappear, they just look for another way around. On a Monday morning, I was out on the balcony watering the flowers when Olivia knocked, holding a white envelope. "This was addressed to you but ended up in my mailbox. No return address." I took the envelope, feeling as if I were holding a block of ice. Inside was a bank statement, not mine, but from an account jointly linked to my name and another person, Matthew Grant. It had been opened more than a year ago, before I left home. Balance, $0. But the transaction history showed dozens of regular cash withdrawals, each ranging from a few hundred to several $1,000s. A small slip of paper was clipped to it: "You can't escape blood. We're still connected." I sat in the chair, taking a deep breath. This wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder that there were still strings I hadn't completely cut. I called Priya. She listened, then said, "That account needs to be closed immediately. We'll work with the bank to remove your name and look into filing charges for unauthorized use." That afternoon, I went to the bank with Priya. The staff checked the records, confirming that my co-owner's signature had been added with a photocopy of my ID, but the copy had no verification stamp. That meant forgery was possible. The bank manager looked at me, his tone serious. "If you agree, we'll forward this file to the Fraud Investigation Department." I nodded instantly. In that moment, I realized I was no longer afraid to bring my son into the light. No more worried about embarrassing him or afraid of neighbors talking. I was choosing truth over silence. 3 days later, the police called me. They wanted to meet to take my statement about the account. Robert went with me. I told them every detail, from how Matthew had once taken my documents to the fact that I had never agreed to open a joint account. A young officer took careful notes, then said, "We'll be in touch when there's progress. But you should be prepared for the fact that the person will know you cooperated." I gave a dry smile. He's known for a long time. No one just said it out loud before. While waiting, I tried to maintain a normal life. I still went to Helen's cafe, still met with the book club at the library, still tended to the balcony flowers. But somewhere inside, a nerve stayed taut, waiting for Matthew's final move. And that day came sooner than I thought. One Friday evening, Olivia knocked on my door, her voice lowered. "Mrs. Karen, there's a car parked outside since this afternoon. A man's been sitting in it, hasn't left. I'm not sure, but I think it's your son." I stepped out onto the balcony and looked down. Under the dim yellow glow of the street lamp, I recognized the familiar posture: head slightly bowed, hands resting on the steering wheel. No mistake. Robert arrived within 20 minutes. He called the police, reminding them of the restraining order. 2 officers showed up, knocked on Matthew's car window. From above, I watched him argue, pointing toward the building. Then one officer handed him a piece of paper, probably a copy of the order, and gestured for him to leave. The engine started, and the car drove off down the street. I stood there until the taillights disappeared. That night, I couldn't fall asleep right away. But I didn't shake the way I used to. Instead, I felt resolute. Every time he tried to pierce my new defenses, I could see more clearly how far I'd come since the day I first walked out of his house. A week later, I got a call from the officer in charge of the bank account case. "Mrs. Karen, we've confirmed there was a forged signature involved. We'll need you to come in and sign some papers so we can move forward with prosecution." Priya came with me. After signing, I asked, "If he's charged, what will happen?" The officer replied, "It depends on the evidence and any prior record. But at the very least, the court will protect you from any financial actions involving your name." Leaving the station, Priya looked at me. "You're doing what many people can't, holding an abuser accountable, even when that abuser is family." That evening, I stepped out onto my balcony with a cup of ginger tea. The city lights flickered as if to remind me that life goes on, regardless of my own private storm. I knew there would be more attempts from Matthew, but I also knew that next time, I wouldn't be alone. I had Robert, Priya, Helen, Olivia, Sarah, and myself, the version that no longer stayed silent. As the night breeze lifted my hair, I whispered into the air. "You don't have the keys anymore." After that night when Matthew parked under my street and was forced to leave by the police, I thought he might ease up, at least temporarily. But I knew his pattern too well. Whenever he was blocked in one direction, he would look for another way to attack. It happened on a Thursday morning. I was putting books on the shelf when the phone rang. The caller ID showed a credit company I had never heard of. A woman's voice on the line said, "Mrs. Collins, we're calling to verify the new loan you applied for online. The amount is $15,000, to be deposited into the connected account." I cut her off. "I never applied for any loan." She was silent for a few seconds, then spoke more slowly. "Then it's possible your personal information has been used without authorization. We'll freeze the file immediately and request verification with the police." I didn't need to guess who was behind it. I called Robert right away. He arrived within 10 minutes, already holding the file of evidence we'd been compiling. "This is an escalation," he said. "He knows he can't get to you directly, so he's trying to throw your life into chaos." We went to the police station and met with the same officer handling the forged bank account case. When I explained the loan incident, he nodded. "We'll merge the two cases. This is clear evidence of repeated fraud." On the way back, Robert asked, "Do you want me to tell Sarah?" I stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. Sarah needed to know to protect herself. Matthew might turn to her once I shut every door. That afternoon, Sarah called me. "Mom, I just got the news. I don't even know what to say anymore. He's not the brother I remember." I could hear her voice catch, and I realized that I hadn't just lost a son, Sarah had lost a brother. Abuse doesn't just destroy the relationship between the abuser and the direct victim, it tears apart the entire family network around them. That night, I made ginger tea and carried it to the balcony. Down on the street, headlights glinted as cars passed. The scent of lavender from my new potted plant drifted into the air. I thought of my husband, of the days when we used to carefully plan every penny we saved for the future. If he were still alive, he would have been far angrier than I was. 2 days later, Olivia knocked with a grave expression. "You should know this. I just overheard 2 people at the cafe down the street talking about an older woman who tricked her son into selling the house and kept all the money. Sounded like they were talking about you." I wasn't surprised. This was one of Matthew's familiar tactics: smear my image in the community to make me feel isolated and ashamed. But the difference this time was that I didn't feel like running. I just smiled faintly. Rumors are like dust. The wind will blow them away if we don't hold on to them ourselves. Olivia smiled back, though I knew she was still worried. She said that if needed, she'd be ready to testify as a witness anytime. The next morning, I got a letter from a bank, not the one I used, asking me to come in and verify a new credit card account. The strange part was that the letter was sent directly to my current apartment address, which meant Matthew had found out where I lived. Robert reacted quickly. He contacted the building manager to tighten entry control and asked security to be on alert if they saw Matthew's car nearby. I felt a chill, not from fear, but from the realization that this game was far from over. That afternoon, Helen called me over to the cafe. She handed me an envelope. Inside was the business card of a local female journalist. "She's a regular here. I told her a little about your situation. She wants to interview you, but will only publish if you agree." At first, I hesitated. But then I realized, I'd been silent long enough for Matthew to write his own story and spread it as truth. If I didn't speak, I'd let someone else define me forever. 2 days later, I met the journalist, Clara, at Helen's cafe. I told her everything from when Matthew began controlling my finances, to when I left and started rebuilding my life. Clara listened, took careful notes, but didn't push. "What do you want me to emphasize most?" she asked. And I heard myself answer, that abuse doesn't only happen between strangers. And that freedom isn't something you're given, it's something you take back yourself, no matter who you have to face. The article was published a week later, in the Everyday Stories section. It didn't name Matthew, but everyone in town knew who it was. The surprising part was the reaction. Many people came to me to share their own stories. There was even an elderly couple who said they, too, had been financially exploited by their children. I began to see that I wasn't alone. But I also knew Matthew would read it. And sure enough, 3 days later, I got a message from an unknown number: "You'll pay for slandering me." I forwarded the message to the police. They added it to the open case file. That evening, I got a call from the lead officer: "Mrs. Karen, we've obtained a warrant to search Matthew's phone and computer. This is the final step before prosecution." When I hung up, I sat quietly in the living room, the warm yellow light falling across the wooden table. I realized that what I once thought of as the final battle was really just a series of smaller fights, and each win was another brick in the solid wall I was building around myself. I didn't know what the verdict would be. But I knew this: no matter the outcome, I would never return to that kitchen where I once stood trembling, my skin burning and my heart weighed down. I had gone too far to turn back. And this time, I wasn't just protecting myself, I was leaving a path for others to follow. The day everything truly ended began with a morning so peaceful I almost forgot I was in the middle of a battle. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, the scent of lavender from the balcony filled the air, and I was halfway through a novel. Then the phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the officer in charge of the case. His voice was clear, but carried a certain heaviness. "Mrs. Karen, we arrested Matthew Grant this morning under a court order. We have strong evidence of financial fraud and violation of the restraining order. I thought you should know before the media reports it." I set the book down, hearing my heartbeat slow. Not joy, not revenge, just a large emptiness in my chest, as if a rope that had been tightening around me had suddenly fallen away, leaving a deep mark behind. I asked, "Did he resist?" "No, but he also didn't confess. The preliminary hearing will be in a few weeks. We'll contact you if you need to testify." After hanging up, I sat still for a long while. I had imagined this moment would come with elation, but the reality felt different. It was like peeling off a bandage that had stuck too tightly. Relief, but still pain. At noon, Robert stopped by. He brought a bouquet of yellow tulips and set them on the kitchen table. "I heard the news," he said, his voice both restrained and gentle. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "He's my son, Robert. But at the same time, he's the person who did everything that made me leave." "You don't have to choose between the two," he replied. "Both of those things can be true." That afternoon, I received a message from Sarah: "I just heard. I'll come see you this weekend." I smiled as I read it. All these months, Sarah had kept in touch, standing by me even though it meant going against her own brother. Maybe I had lost a son, but I still had a daughter. 2 days later, the local paper ran the story. The article was short, but enough for the town to know. A few old neighbors sent messages to check in, some apologized for believing the rumors. I replied briefly, without blame. I didn't need them to understand the whole story, only to know that the truth wasn't what had been twisted. That weekend, Sarah came. We sat at the kitchen table, drinking ginger tea. She looked around the small apartment and said, "This place suits you. I've never seen you this at peace." I laughed. Because before, I was always trying to keep the peace instead of keeping myself. Sarah squeezed my hand. "You don't have to explain anything. I'm here for you, not for family matters, not for court. Just for you." Those words felt like a thin blanket draped over my heart. A week before the hearing, I got a letter from Matthew's lawyer. No apology, no acceptance of responsibility, just a proposal that I withdraw my complaint, and in return, he would not countersue me for damaging his reputation. I read it once, then put it in a drawer without replying. His reputation wasn't ruined by me, it was the price he paid to control me. On the day of the preliminary hearing, I didn't go. My lawyer and Robert represented me. I chose to stay home, make a pot of tea, open the balcony door, and listen to the sounds of traffic in the street below. I knew everything was happening in a courtroom a few miles away, but I also knew I had already done my part. That afternoon, Robert called. The judge upheld the charges. There will be a full trial next month. But more importantly, the restraining order has been extended for another year. I thanked him. When I hung up, I felt a rush of fresh air fill the room, not from the balcony, but from inside me. That evening, Olivia and Helen came over. We had dinner together: toast, vegetable soup, and strawberry jam Olivia had made. We laughed more than I thought I could. At one point, I looked around and realized I was sitting among people who asked for nothing but my presence. A few weeks later, when the trial took place, I still didn't attend. I had decided to let the law speak for me. And when the final verdict came, Matthew was found guilty of fraud and ordered to repay part of the money. I didn't feel joy, only the sense of a door closing. Not long after, I received an envelope from the court. Inside was a document confirming that all my assets and accounts were now permanently protected from Matthew's interference. I placed the paper in a small frame and set it on my bookshelf. Not to show off, but to remind myself that I had done something I wouldn't even have dared to imagine a year ago. Summer arrived. Sarah and I spent a weekend at the beach. We walked on the sand, ate ice cream, and sat on the hotel balcony watching the waves. One evening, as the sea wind blew strong, Sarah said, "You've been through hell and back, but you didn't let it take your heart. I'm proud of you." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the ocean, thinking of all the nights I lay awake, fearing every knock on the door. Now, the only pounding I felt was the waves, steady, patient, like the heartbeat of someone who had found herself again. When autumn came, I continued going to the book club, helping Helen at the cafe on busy days, and sometimes looking after Jasper for Olivia. My life wasn't grand, but it was mine and no one had the right to take it anymore. One evening, as I was closing the cafe with Helen, she asked, "If you could go back and tell the Karen from a year ago one thing, what would it be?" I smiled. That silence isn't peace. And that sometimes, family isn't blood, it's the people who choose to stay when everything falls apart. She nodded, and I knew she understood. Now, every morning I wake up, make a cup of ginger tea, and open the balcony doors to let in the sunlight. No longer do I feel someone standing behind me, watching my every move, no longer do I calculate every penny to avoid someone else's anger. I have closed a painful chapter, but I haven't torn it out. I keep it not to torment myself, but to remember that this freedom has a price. And I've paid it, not with money, but with resolve. Maybe one day, Matthew will change. Maybe not. But I know this, my future no longer depends on the answer to that question. And when I look down at the koi pond in the park nearby, watching the fish drift freely under the shimmering surface, I smile. Because I'm doing the same swimming in my own space, without needing permission to exist. Lesson from the story: there are ties called family that can choke the breath out of you and steal your freedom. Leaving is not betrayal, it's saving yourself. We cannot change others if they don't want to change, but we can choose to protect our own hearts and dignity. True strength lies not in revenge, but in standing up, speaking the truth, and rebuilding your life. And sometimes, real family isn't blood, it's the people who stay when everyone else has left.